The Sanguine Nobles are the seldom seen, deadly servants of Mohg, the Lord of Blood. Sanguine Nobles are known to rise from pools of blood and attack those who do not serve Mohg. These assassins are twisted missionaries who desire to share the gospel of accursed blood. The thick black cloth the Sanguine veil is marked with a grand metallic pattern on the shoulder, a signifier of the noble rank they intend to claim upon the advent of the new dynasty they are working to install in the lands between. Bloody Finger Neregus is the first Sanguine noble that most tarnished encounter. Located in a ravine leading northeast from Agheel Lake, he wields the deadly Reduvia, a jagged dagger with a distinctive curled blade. The Sanguine use this weapon to slice one's wrist and spray a wave of blood onto their opponent, inflicting blood loss and hemorrhaging the target. To the Sanguine Noble, this is a proud testament to the success of its vicious design, as the weapon is perpetually coated in blood. Deep in the consecrated snowfield, a Sanguine Noble defends the blood-covered waypoint to Mohgwyn Palace. Oftentimes you will see other servants of Mohg wielding the Bloody Hellas, an ominous piercing sword with a winding blade. This horrifying weapon is designed to bore into flesh, causing severe blood loss at the wound, as the extracted blood trickles gracefully down the length of the blade. Build. Starting with the easiest to obtain, the Reduvia. As mentioned before, you obtain this by slaying Bloody Finger Neregus in a ravine leading northeast from Agheel Lake in Limgrave. When encountering this invader, Bloody Finger Hunter Uria is automatically summoned to assist you a few moments into the fight. This makes obtaining this weapon rather simple if you are less experienced. To obtain a second Reduvia, you'll need to complete a second playthrough. However, since this weapon's primary damage stems from its potent Ash of War, one Reduvia is more than enough, and many people consider this to be the best knife in the game. Your second weapon, the Bloody Hellas, can be obtained by defeating a Sanguine Noble at the Wraithblood Ruins and then looting the chest in the room behind him. Finally, we must face this notorious Sanguine Noble deep in the consecrated snowfield. This invader drops the entire armor set and is extremely annoying to fight, mostly because he is surrounded by a swarm of giant dragonflies and rotten hounds. Just a heads up, the Sanguine Nobles are ironically weak to slashing and blood loss buildup. Both of these weapons scale off of Dex and Arcane, but when leveling, you're going to want to prioritize Arcane. This is due to the fact that enhancing the Arcane stat boosts not only the weapon's attack power, but also amplifies its blood loss buildup for the melee attacks and the Ash of War. The Bloody Hellas deals pierce damage that has excellent reach to offset the close range of Reduvias in melee combat. The Bloody Hellas' Ash of War is Dynast Finesse, a unique skill to this blade. There are two phases to the Ash of War. The initial phase jolts backwards and has more iframes than a dodge roll, much like Bloodhound Step. Iframes, if you're not familiar, are the number of frames where you are invincible during an action, like when you dodge roll. When you use the Ash of War dodge, you can follow up with an epic lunge forward and 2 follow-up attacks. This Ash of War does a surprising amount of stance damage, so coupling it with the Stonebarg Crack Tier and Thorny Crack Tier could set up a crit attack on several bosses. The Reduvia blade has an Ash of War that is essentially the Blood Blade Ash of War, but without consuming health in the process of use. The Reduvia's Blood Blade causes significantly more blood loss buildup per hit compared to the dagger's melee strikes. Therefore, unless there's a need for quick, close-range hits, using the Ash of War is the optimal strategy for most situations. Although we don't typically see the Sanguine Nobles use incantations, we figured it wouldn't break lore if we included some here. As backup incantations, I used the Swarm of Flies, Blood Flame Talons, and Blood Boon. The Dragon Communion Seal is best when using blood incantations because it scales primarily off of Arcane. However, personally, I'm not a huge fan of these incantations. If you're curious of how they ranked among all of the incantations, check out our incantations comparison list video, link in bio. But yeah, I mean, the Swarm of Flies is pretty good. It helps you proc bleed on bosses, but it doesn't deal a whole lot of damage. It's purely to increase your bleed. Blood Flame Talons is alright, but it's so close ranged, I pretty much never use it in the real world. Blood Boon is actually probably the best of these 3 incantations. It's pretty useful for crowd control as well as against large bosses because it will tick down their health pretty rapidly and obviously increase blood buildup. The main drawback for this build, aside from the evident lack of armor, is the inability to change weapon affinities for bosses resistant to hemorrhaging. However, bleed is incredibly effective against most bosses, so it's a minor drawback in my opinion. The talismans that I typically go with on this build are the Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Millicent's Prosthesis, and Rotten Sword Insignia. However, the blue Dancer Charm can come in handy for this build, or the green Turtle Talisman, as always, is very reliable. The recommended stat progressions should look something like this: front-loading Arcane, then Dex, then Strength. And that's pretty much it for the Sanguine Noble build. If you're interested in the most powerful bleed builds in Elden Ring, check out our top 10 ranked bleed builds video, link in the bio. As always, thank you so much for watching. We're going to keep these videos coming.